Hello, my name is Joshua Stegner, and this is my final video on how to make a meal and some of the science behind the process of cooking. I'll be cooking chicken as my protein, rice as my starch, asparagus as my veggies, and bechamel as my sauce. Now, before I begin cooking, I would like to go over some of the science behind cooking. First off, we'd like to talk about our two mediums that we're going to use in this video. The first of which is going to be water. Now, water properties which keep it so fluid is that it forms powerful hydrogen bonds due to being polar in nature, constantly breaking apart and reforming. Now, this is great as a medium because it allows a lot of energy to go into the water. Now, before it raises any temperature at all. Thus retains heat very well also, and is a very good at transferring this heat into the food that it is surrounding. Now, our second medium is fats, such as oil or butter. Specifically in cooking, we use triglycerides, or bonds of fatty acids and chains of carbon bound together. Now, fats are capable of pulling out flavors and enhancing foods. Due to the high smoking point of oil, which is about 400 degrees, it makes it an ideal medium for cooking foods at high temperature, more so than water can, about 212 degrees for water. Now, next we'll talk about some of the things that comprise our food or make up our food. The first of which is carbohydrates, like glucose, composed of carbon and oxygen, and hydrogen, which are the building blocks of all other carbohydrates. Now, these form carbohydrates like starch. Now, starch is good for thickening liquids because they burst open upon heating and contribute to with other carbohydrates such as an roux, which we'll be making later on in this video. And the second part that we are going to talk about is proteins. Now, all proteins are a string of amino acids which are affected by cooking, called denaturing. They unravel due to the energy input in food when cooking and affect the structure and quality of the food. Now, this affects flavor and texture in foods, particularly proteins like chicken, which we are going to be cooking later on in this video. Now, there are two main types of cooking that we will be using here today in this video. One being conduction. Now, this is direct heat. Heat source is applied directly to the food molecules that we are cooking, such as an open fire, such as in a grill or a range. And then convection, which takes molecules from the medium which we use, such as oil or water, and heats these molecules up to apply to the mediums while cooking, such methods as boiling or frying foods. A big part of what affects these methods is the utensils used. Now, you can use porcelain and glass to achieve different results. If you're trying to not brown certain foods, it'd be ideal to go with porcelain, or if you're trying to retain heat within the cookware, glass might be heat retention glass would be a good source to use as well. But since time is an issue in this class, the one we're going to stick with will be the metal, that because it'll transfer the heat the fastest of any of the mediums that we could possibly use, which will be ideal for cooking purposes today. The first thing I'm going to be cooking is chicken. My method of cooking will be baking. This is a combination of radiation and hot air convection. It uses the heat from the walls of the oven to transfer heat into the air, which surrounds the food. A metal pan is then used to heat is transferred to the bottom of the side of the chicken without overcooking it. I will cook the chicken at about 400 degrees for about 20 minutes to ensure that it is cooked to the safe range of 165. A higher temperature is required to get the food evenly cooked because there's only heat transferred in the air, which is not dense as other mediums, and requires a lot more energy to be inputted into the food. And we'll come back for that in about 20 minutes. I prepared the chicken in a brine to penetrate the meat thoroughly. A brine is the only flavoring that will penetrate the meat completely due to it disrupting the structure of the muscle filaments that other marinades and spices did not. There are many types of meat, such as red and white meat, The chicken I have chosen is white meat. It is white because there's a lack of myoglobin, which is a fast twitch muscle fiber like chicken breast, compared to constantly used muscle that makes up red meat, such as in beef. I kept the chicken in the fridge to make sure the accumulation of bacteria didn't grow, and when cooking the chicken, we want it to reach the temperature of 165 degrees to ensure that all bacteria is killed. This method of cooking, the meat will evenly cook it without drying out the meat too much due to the lack of the Maillard reaction or the browning process, which can squeeze water out of the food. For my starch, I am going to be boiling white rice in a metal pan on the stovetop in water. The metal again is used for the conductive properties required to boil and simmer water. Conductive currents in the water are ideal for cooking rice so that the water can provide the most even heating and transfer of energy to the food. When rice begins to cook, it absorbs water and releases some of its starch molecules, which is dissolvable in water, making the rice stick together. Stirring the rice can cause it to become very mushy, sticky, and unappealing due to this release of starch in the water. The rice also absorbs some of the water, which is why we have the increase in the rice's size. So we're just going to let that simmer in the desired time. We're going to turn the heat down a little bit and let it cook. We're not going to even touch it. We'll come back to it when it's done. Asparagus will be the vegetable of choice today. I'll be cooking this in a metal saute pan for its conductivity. I will be frying the asparagus in a little bit of olive oil as my medium on about medium-high heat. And the asparagus will have a light coating of salt and pepper and garlic powder. Go ahead and add those to the pan now. Asparagus is a vegetable that is a stem or a stalk, meaning it is a support between the roots and the leaves. They are full of fiber and nutrients due to the flow of nutrients from the roots and the leaves through the stem. I've already cut off the ends of the asparagus due to it drying out during the shipping process while cooking. The Maillard reaction is apparent in the asparagus, or the browning process due to the direct heat of conduction cooking. I personally like my asparagus to be a little more brown than normal, so I'm going to let it cook through a little more thoroughly on each side. Alright, for my sauce, I'll be making a cheese bechamel sauce to top off my chicken and asparagus with. Now, bechamel is a milk-based sauce. Milk is considered a whole food when you're looking at this. It consists of fat molecules in the form of triglycerides and saturated fat and fat globules that are suspended in water, and carbohydrates called lactose, which most adults cannot digest, and proteins called curd and whey. Now, the different types of milk have different amounts of fat content, which will affect the consistency of the sauce when cooked. Whole milk is about 3 to 5% fat. Low-fat milks, usually 2 or 1%, and skim milks can range between 0.1 and 0.5%. And heavy cream, which is what we are going to be using in this sauce, can range upwards of 30%. And I like my sauce a little bit thicker, so that's why I use heavy cream. Now, to cook this, you will start with 2 tablespoons of butter, which have already been added to the saucepan on a medium heat, and 2 tablespoons of cornstarch combined together in the metal saucepan, which I'll do now. Now, cornstarch is more effective at thickening milk sauces than is meat stocks, because it bonds both with milk proteins and the fat globules. Thus, it can also be substituted for flour in recipes if you are gluten intolerant. And after the starch is cooked, I will add half a pint of heavy cream and salt and pepper to taste. But we gotta mix this in and make it a little more thick. And you'll see it brown a little bit as you go through with it as well. I'll turn the heat up just a little bit. Now that it has cooked a little bit, we're going to go ahead and add our heavy cream that's already been preheated to the sauce. We'll go ahead and mix it up a little bit, just to make sure it thickens. That has a nice texture to it right there. Turn down the heat a little bit more since it's already hot cream. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of cheese to this. Now I chose Parmesan cheese, which will be pretty similar to Alfredo, but we're missing a couple of the key ingredients, so this will be a cheesy bechamel sauce. Alright, go ahead and mix that in, let it melt. And we are ready to serve it over our food after I add a little bit of salt and pepper to it. Now we can just drizzle some of the sauce over the chicken. And the asparagus if you like it. Just a little bit on the asparagus. But there you have it. That's the completed meal right there with our protein, our veggies, and our starch.